So we're going to move on to hand tools. And when we're making a hand tool, we're going to use a little higher carbon steel. The higher carbon gets us a little more strength. So if we want more strength, we need metal that it has hardenable properties. And the hardenable property comes from the carbon. For these tools that I'm going to talk you through, recommending the 4140 or 4130, the chrome molybdenum. Chrome moly, because the rest of that word is kind of weird to say. So the numbers here, this 40 and this 30, it's not a coincidence that it matches up to the 0.4% or 0.3% carbon. It's telling you what its carbon content is. This carbon content in the chrome moly formulation is a pretty forgiving metal in terms of working it and getting it to harden and then temper. But because of that extra carbon and these extra materials, it's a little fussier about the forging temperature. The forging temperature needs to be within that orange to red heat. You don't want to go above an orange or a bright orange, because you'll just be kind of destroying the blends that are in here, roughly burning them out. So if you end up burning this tool or taking it to like a near welding temperature, the tool might not look bad at the beginning, but it's going to end up with problems later down the road. So I would start over at that point. If you work it too cold, you go down beyond a red heat or down cooler. That's the blue brittle range, and that will also create a problem with the tool later on, or might crack right in front of you. It becomes very brittle, as the name suggests, at that point. So the 3/4 round, which you can buy this as sucker rod, which is readily available and fairly cheap. We know what's in sucker rod. It's made purposeful, with particular blends of material in it. And you can always look that up. So it's a good choice for these hand tools. So the 3/4 inch round is also handy size, pun intended. You could go bigger. They have bigger sucker rod. You could go smaller. They have smaller sucker rod. You can certainly buy this tool still in different lengths, but the 3/4 is kind of a nice size to hold on to and to hit. If we get any heavier, it's going to take a lot more effort to get that started, to pick it up, etc. And why wear yourself out to begin with? It has to do with that Newton's law of physics. The heavier the object, the more energy to move it and overcome that initial inertia. It's also nice to have something that ends up to be about 8 to 8.5 inches from the working end, which is in direct contact with hot steel. So starting with 7.5 inch length or smaller lengths, if you're really going to taper that down, like let's say you're going to make an eye punch, it's going to be very small at the end. So you're going to end up drawing that out a lot longer, meaning it's going to be a lot longer. So you can start with a little shorter length. So the first order of business is to create the hammer end. And the hammer end is something that needs to have a slight taper. It needs to have a round head and some indexing so that you can hold onto it. The slight taper gives the the tool or your hammer a better chance to center that blow down the middle. A dome on the end gives you a better chance to hit the tool and not create a jarring blow. If your end is perfectly flat, you would have to hit that perfectly flat to keep the tool from wrenching out of your hand or being knocked out of your hand. So putting a domed edge gives you, well, what it really does is gives you a whole lot more flat surfaces, because a circle is really just a whole bunch of tiny little flat lines. So the dome gives you many flat surfaces to pick from. So to get that to happen, we're going to start with a pretty prescriptive set of hammer blows. 2 on the end, and then bring it back a little bit and hit it back 1. So 2 on the end gives you a little more thinning here. 1 on the end takes the whole thing back to about 1.5 inches from the end. Do that prescriptive blow on all 4 sides. When you're done, you should end up with a lazy square. It's going to be very tempting to take this to a prettier square, and it's not necessary, and all it's going to do is remove material from the end when you do want this to remain fairly hefty. Once you have your lazy square, you just take these unforged parts and turn it into an octagon. The octagon makes it very easy to see that it's a hand tool and it has a struck end, and that is your struck end. Once you have the end in the octagon in place, and again, want to really caution against over forging this. I have seen struck ends get really long and pencil thin. That's not the goal. I mean, you want to leave enough there to hit. So don't overdo it at this point. And then the end is going to look like this. So here's our octagon, and this cupping is a result of what happens due to the nature of the material, as the hammer penetration only goes so far. So while it's hot, place it in a post vise and rasp to a dome shape, and then take off these edges. This dome shape will help to prevent the mushrooming effect. As you saw a little bit with that chisel point, mushrooming is when, after a bit of use, this expands, this top part expands out and creates a little shard of metal ready to break off. And that actually is something you want to keep ahead of, because that piece can and has broken off and harmed people. Not too long ago, I heard of a situation where a mushroomed end, a little piece, broke off. I mean, it literally becomes a projectile, almost like a bullet at that point, entered into somebody's wrist, and they needed a tendon repair after that. So keep it clean. It's an easy thing to do. You can file it off or even do it on a belt grinder. And as long as you keep the tool from turning a color or getting too hot, you're not going to over stress that working end. So mushrooming, keep your tool clean. Mushrooming is dangerous and illegal. So there's my nurse talk. All right, so let's watch the struck end, the lazy square. 4 sides, got your lazy square, and then moving to the diagonal. So 2 hits on the end and 1 back towards yourself. 2 on the end, 1 back towards you. That should get you a nice, even octagon all the way around. And now's a good time to file it. You're just gonna file out that cupping that happened. Create your dome shape. And file off all those edges. Now you're ready to put your indexing in place. And the indexing is something you're going to hold on to, meaning you wanted a particular direction. And the placement of that is going to end up strategic. The only thing I would have you kind of be concerned about at this point is keep it so that there's a flat up and a flat down. You've got 8 choices, so pick one of them. If you don't have the flat up and the flat down, when you go to straighten this tool out, you could end up dinging one of your pretty little octagons. So that helps you straighten your tool by being able to hit it on a flat edge. You're going to position it over the bick of your anvil in such a place that this matches the curve. This curve matches the curve of your hammer. Hit it a good 5 or 6 times on one side, turn it over, same number of hits. And again, this is tool steel, so you're keeping this nice and warm as you go. Once you have your indexing started, bring it half off the far side of the anvil and just bring that indexing on down the tool. It'll lengthen the tool a little bit and it looks nice. So there you go. So we'll see a video of the indexing over the edge of the horn that matches the roundness of your rounded hammer. 4, 5, 6. So 6 blows on each side. Don't take that thinner than a 1/2 inch. Off the far side of the anvil, the off side of the anvil, follow that indexing down your tool. You don't want to hit in this cooler range where it's the blue brittle range. So see how straightening it, you can hit it on the flat as you go. So here, just I broke that up. So we're just going to watch the lazy square to a diagonal. And the reason why I want to take you through this whole thing one more time here is so many people get hung up on this particular part. Like you get really fussy about this struck end, and you should be able to get to the point where you're just kind of knocking this out in one heat and not over forging this end. I know when the first time I did one of these, that got way over forged. So just wanted to show you that, that can all happen. How long was this video? I think in about a minute. Now you're ready to turn your tool around. Well, and then you would file it after that. So don't forget, you want to file the little dome in the end. So then you're ready to turn it around and create something on the working end. The first working end I'm going to talk us through is a chisel point. It's a very necessary blacksmithing tool, and it's also something that's a disposable. You're gonna work through these, and you're gonna need to be able to make another one. So knowing how to do that is in your best interest. So the indexing here becomes important where the placement is. If you're not cognizant of where this indexing is in relation to where your chisel point ends up, it's going to end up on an angle. And that makes it a little harder to to use that tool. It'll still work, but you're going to have to maybe move your hand at a funny angle to get it straight on your piece while you're cutting something or while you're slitting something. So one way, or one helpful thing to do to get you started, is to create flats on two sides. Don't go farther than 5/16 of an inch, you know, just a little past 1/4 of an inch, and make sure that you're doing that on the side opposite where you want your chisel. Your chisel can be perpendicular to or parallel to your indexing. It just needs to be one or the other, not on an angle. So if you make this little flat here, when you turn it to the side and you get ready to create your chisel point, you can use it as a line of sight. Because what's going to happen is you'll end up with one side maybe a little higher than the other. If that does happen, don't panic. It's not a big deal. Just angle your hammer so that you're knocking down the high side. Now, if you'll notice, we're not removing any material before we get started on this taper, which is all a chisel is a chisel point taper. We want this to be as wide as possible. So no need to remove any material ahead of time. So once you have your flats, you've lined it up, your line of sight properly, you're going to make your point. And just go ahead and get that chisel point started and follow that back up towards the middle of your tool. You want your indexing to meet this taper somewhere in the middle. Don't dress the sides at this point. The only reason this is flat is because we started with those little flats. You want to keep this growing as wide. I mean, it's one of the few times when you can just let that width happen naturally. And here's where you might notice that you've got a slight twist or a high side, and just angle your hammer to keep that flat. Keep the chisel flat on the hammer and angle your hammer to take down the high side. When you've gotten this down to where you've got like a fat 8-inch thick end, so in this view, it would be the height versus the width, which is going to grow to about 1.25 inches. So once this end, the side we can't see, like this height going down towards the anvil, is 1/8 inch thick, you're done with your chisel. And the only thing you want to make sure is that you kept the growth the same on both sides, and you would measure from your shortest corner. And when I say shortest corner, what I mean is these might not line up the perfect distance away from the hammer end of your tool. So the shortest corner is what you'd want to use to make sure you've got the right dimensions here. The tool needs to be as flat as possible, and the easiest way to see that is keep your eye on the line. As you flatten this, there's a line that forms here, and it's highlighted here with soapstone. If that's straight, chances are your tool is flat. If it's not straight, then that's your opportunity to straighten the line to get this surface as flat as possible. Friction is not your friend, and any bump in here will create friction when you go to use the tool. Now you're ready to dress the sides, and that's either going to be to get this centered up or to remove any unevenness that was formed while you were forging. Be very wary of the temptation to hold this up off the anvil on a horizontal plane. What you really want is this tool down a little bit so that the side is flat on the anvil and you're making this flat. Don't You're not forging this back into itself. You want this width. You're just straightening out the sides. And all the taper should meet up somewhere in the middle. So tapering from the indexing, tapering from the chisel. And this chisel point is parallel to or on the same plane as the indexing. Next, you want to file this flat, and you can give yourself a head start by just cutting that off. Get it started on the anvil and then bring it over to the off side to cut that end off with the chisel. So I'm going to show, you're going to see two videos kind of back to back here, and one is with the indexing parallel to the chisel edge, and the other one is perpendicular too. So we'll start by setting our flats. Remember our 1/4 inch flats that we'll use as our line of sight. And then make your chisel point. We're not correcting for growth. We're not worried about the width. We didn't take any material away ahead of time. We're just making our chisel point taper. And that's just dressing the sides so that everything's nice and centered and even. You're not really taking away any from the width of that material at this point. Notice how this is flat on the anvil. So now it's the same thing, and this might be a little redundant, but I just really want to bring home the point that where that indexing is placed is significant. Once you've got that down to kind of a fat 1/8 inch by 1 1/4, you should be ready to go. You can dress your sides. And that's all there's to it. You've got a chisel. That line is nice and even, so you can be sure that your surface is flat. Cut off that little rounded edge that's going to happen as you hammer this. And that'll give you a head start for filing your chisel point. Your tool, once you've got that edge cut off, is ready to normalize. What do I mean by normalizing? Normalizing is something that allows your piece to chill out after the workout you just gave it. You heated and cooled it, and that causes the normally neat little structures of your metal to get all warped out of shape. What we want is those to line back up in a way that allows the metal to be soft enough to file. The easiest way to do that is bring it back to forging heat, which is about a medium orange, and this changes depending on what kind of metal you're using. So you always want to know or have access to the manufacturer's instructions for the metal I'm recommending in this talk. It's a medium orange heat, and you want to take it to that heat rather slowly, because you don't want to just get the outside to the orange. You want the whole tool to have the right amount of time to normalize. And then you want to allow it to cool slowly. This doesn't mean throwing it on the floor of your forge. This means keeping it on the side of your forge where it's still pretty hot and let it cool down slowly. If you want to make it even softer, you could do something called annealing, and you would want to cool it even slower in something like vermiculite or a bucket of potash. So once it's normalized, you can file it. And when you file it, you would start by having it upright in a post vise. And you'll notice this has a slight dome to it. It's probably about 1/16 inch higher in the middle than it is on the ends. Once you've got that, put your tool sideways in the post vise or horizontal, and you're going to file off an edge and bring it to a point, you know, like the tip of a little house. And the amount you're going to go back is kind of dictated by how wide this is. This gives you a nice edge that's supported on both sides of the tool. And then you want to get rid of all the corners. So you created a little corner here when you filed it, one on the other side, and on the edges. It's also a good idea at this point to make one side round and the other side sharp. And I'll show you why in a second. But that'll give you a little more flexibility with this tool. And then again, take off all those corners. Notice how everything's got a round, almost dome shape to it at this point. Friction is your enemy, and that dome shape allows it to kind of deflect off the sides of the metal as you're chiseling, as you're cutting with it. And don't take this down to your final filing. You don't need a razor sharp edge, but get very close. This is where that old adage, if a blacksmith will a keen edge win, first forge thick, which is what we're doing here, and then file thin. So by leaving this a tad thicker for filing after the heat treatment, it allows you to remove any of the material that got decarburized by exposing it to an oxygenated fire. So here is the two edges in use. So you slit something down the middle, and then you're going to put it upright in the post vise and use your sharp edge to even out the cut you made, and use your round edge to start to open up those bars and widen this area at the root of the cut, which will prevent cracking as you do whatever you're going to do to this particular piece. So now we're ready to just talk through a quick blacksmith heat treat. This is not a class on metallurgy. That would be another couple-hour class. So I'm just going to provide a real quick review of an accepted blacksmith harden and temper method. I would ask that you look for more detailed information from your instructor, or even, knock on wood, a soon-to-be held CBA conference. I think our next one is scheduled for Vista, where I'm sure the instructors there will be going over how to do this in more detail. So once your piece is normalized and filed, you're going to reheat about 1 inch, and that's what this chalk line represents, and that's the amount you're heated. You want to take it to the upper transformation temperature, which is ensuring that all the different materials are heated to the appropriate amount, or to austenite, and then you want to quench it. That upper transformation temperature is like a dark red color for the particular metal that I'm recommending, this 4140 or 4130. And it's a little past, some people, I've heard a lot of people use, oh, when it's no longer attracted to a magnet, then you're done. No, it's just a little past that. So take it up to this temperature slowly. You don't want to burn your tip off. You want to slowly ease this into that darker red, barely orange color. And then you're going to quench it in water. And this metal is perfectly fine being quenched in water. And when you quench it in water, a couple things happen. The first thing that happens is this tip that's now cooler is going to contract. So you don't want to make a solid line across there, which could cause you trouble down the road. It could cause a line of weakness that you don't want. So you're going to want to dip it up and down slightly, but never going past, it's easier to see on this picture, this little bit of the heated part. The other thing that's going to happen is when you put this in water, you're going to create steam. You're going to hear it, you're going to see it. And the steam is going to insulate that metal from cooling, from the cooling properties of the metal. So you want to whisk away the steam, and that's best accomplished by a figure 8. So up and down, just a little, and a little figure 8 is going to get this to the martensite, which is what we want on the end to make it hard. And at that point, well, let me back up one. You're going to do this to the count of 6 to 10 for something this thin. If it was fatter, you know, maybe the count of 12 or 1 or 2 more. So the count about 6 to 10, you're going to make the figure 8 up and down, and then you're going to bring it to the side of your anvil. And you notice this is way off the side of the anvil. You do not want the anvil sucking your heat, because what you want is your heat to get sucked down into the edge you just cooled so that we can temper it. The first action of quenching it makes it hard and brittle. We want to get a little heat back in there and to make it strong and not just hard. Hard is brittle, strong will last much longer. So the piece off the edge of the anvil, so that you're not sucking the heat in the anvil, that you're coaxing the heat to the cool end of the tip. You're going to take I just have a cracked piece of a grinding wheel that I use to rub it off to a shiny part, because then you'll get to see the colors run. And the colors are going to go from straw to blue. And what you want is that straw or almost brassy color. That's going to be the right amount of temper for this particular metal. Again, this is not a lesson on metallurgy. This is kind of a quick, acceptable way to harden and temper your tool. And this process is for this particular type of metal. If you're using anything else, you're going to have to refer to there's charts or the manufacturer's specifications. So that's your chisel. Your chisel's now ready to use. If I don't see Greg's face pop up, I'm going to assume there's no questions.